Welcome back to our fifth episode of Around the Bases. Today's guest is Anthony Silkwood. Silkwood is a Southern Illinois native. He's currently the coordinator of baseball operations and director of player development at Jacksonville State. Silkwood, thanks for being here. Really appreciate you jumping on and doing this with us. I'm pumped to talk to you.
No, absolutely. I love talking with you guys. You guys do a great job in the state of Illinois and surrounding areas, so it's absolutely a blast to be on here.
So, Marquette Catholic alum down there in Southern Illinois. Is Zeke Elliott, is he from Alton or that area?
He is.
He is? Okay.
Yeah.
He didn't go to your high school, though, did he?
No. He would have went to the public school, but he did not go. He left. I'll know where he went to high school,
okay.
But it was not in Alton.
Okay. So in high school, how was your high school team? Did you have a good team when you were in high school? Did you make it to state or anything like that?
I did not my year. Our best year was probably my junior year when I was there. That was an absolute blast. We won regionals. Got beat by Greenville, if I remember correctly, by a guy named Eaton. He pitched at Carbondale afterwards, so he had a good career. Did all good stuff there, but it was my best year as far as that goes. Had a legendary coach. My first year as a freshman was Greg DeCourcy, and then he retired, and then my dad took over for the next 5 or 6 years, I believe. They were much better after I left. Let's just put it that way. They went on like 2 state runs back to back, and it was a pretty good years for them.
So I know it's kind of like a smaller school. What is it, 2A probably?
Yeah.
Yeah. So were you a 2A or were you a PO, or did you guys even have POs when you were in high school?
So we didn't have POs in high school when I was in high school. I didn't even really pitch. I was the guy that pitched when we were down a lot or up a ton, that we just needed to eat up innings and whatnot. My dad being a former pro, like him understanding how pitching works and having everything set up to where he's able to do that, allowed him to make sure he took care of everybody's arms and took care of everybody's throwing loads. So I was kind of that guy. I was a infielder, played third base my senior year, shortstop my junior year. Was an absolute blast. Couldn't hit a breaking ball. Anything over 85 was fine for me. But when they started throwing breaking balls, like I had a hard time with that. I couldn't really do anything with it.
So you kind of mentioned your dad. So he played in the minor leagues, right, for the Cardinals. Is that correct?
Correct.
So how was kind of his experience playing baseball professionally? And then just him as a person, how did all of that kind of influence who you are today?
Man, my dad is basically my biggest mentor and friend and idol that I could ever have, which I'm very fortunate, obviously. But with him, as far as baseball goes, it's amazing how much I knew when I was 18 years old and how much I don't know now. So like I thought I had it all figured out as a kid, and I thought I knew everything, and I kind of tricked my dad a little bit where he didn't think I was always listening. I was always listening. I just didn't hear him. And I think that's a big thing where we look at now, and him playing in the Cardinals organization, his whole story that he had, as well as, he was a mop-up pitcher. He threw one outing for Gastonia where he was a mop-up arm, and the right person saw him, and the right person was George Kissel, who you talk about Whitey baseball, you talk about Cardinal baseball, you think of George Kissel, you think of Whitey. You think of those guys, and me being able to grow up listening to quotes from George Kissel and how they did things and how they played, it would have transformed my career then. But what it has done is allowed me to transform it now as a coach, because like I did listen to him then. I just didn't hear him, and I didn't implement the things that he was talking about. And I think that is a huge thing for me. It was always a lot of pressure too. I should have been good. I was supposed to be good. I just didn't work hard. And I think that's what my high school career and that part of my life that I have, looking back on it, was just, I didn't work hard enough to be successful. The best baseball players when I was playing high school, were football players. When you look at the guys that you played against, my freshman year, I go up against Jake Odorizzi, who was a draft pick committed to Louisville at that time. Like, now he's starting World Series games and everything like that. It's just one of those things you look at, like, what did they do and how much they separate, and it's the hard work that they did, and I just didn't do it.
Yeah, so kind of talking about that, I guess then, when you were in high school, I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit later. Your military experience. I know you went to the military out of high school, but um, were you even looking to play in college in high school, or was that probably not an option for you, or were you just not interested at the time?
It was a very, very minuscule option. I hated school at the time. I wasn't committed to anything, and I just had no direction. And there's nothing worse for a person to start school and have no direction. You talk about the kids that jump into a 4-year school and they start getting, you know, 3 years in college debt before they have any direction of life. It's a pretty financial burden that you put on people,
Hmm.
or yourself. So understanding that and seeing what that looked like, I took a semester off school, started looking at that, and um, just really didn't have any drive. I was always the guy. My sister was a standout athlete. My dad was the pro. Like I was supposed to be good, and I just wasn't. And I always felt like I blamed other people. I always felt like I looked at other reasons other than the fact that I just did not work hard.
Yeah. Um, so I guess you probably kind of answered the question there, but you went to the Marines out of high school. So first off, appreciate you doing that, and thank you for your service there. So what kind of led you to joining the military? I mean, was it kind of like that no direction feeling that you had, or what was it?
Um, kind of not. So, my dad, at that time, I'm living with my dad, and I take a semester off school. I'm working a part time job at the ice rink, and um, he comes home one day and he goes, Anthony, he goes, if you're not going to go to school, you better get a full time job. And I said, okay, Dad. And me knowing it all then, and me my little smart aleckness, I was like, I would get a job. I was like, that's fine, I would get a job. And I went to all the recruiting offices for all the military branches, and the Marines sounded like it was the hardest. And I was like, I'm going to do that. And I came home, didn't tell them, didn't do anything with that. Signed up for 5 years, did all my swearing in, and then I told him, and I thought he was going to kill me. So it was one of those things. Like I was like, it was kind of like, I'll show you that I'll go get a job, I'll go do that, and then it actually happened. And you look back, and it's just like, wow, like how off the cuff was that? And that's what I talk about, like with direction. Like I was just so impulsive. If I had had instant success in high school, I was just like, oh, I'm not very good at this, or I'm not very good at that, and it was just instant thing for me. And that's really what it started off with. I didn't have the whole, my whole family served in the military. I was the only person that didn't play college sports in my family. And when you look at it like that, it's like, okay, like, yeah, I kind of paved my own way a little bit in a sense of that. At the time, it was very impulsive, but at the time, it was what I needed. And I think everybody in my life, from high school coaches, teachers, friends, and family, like they tell you the same thing. Like I had absolutely no direction in that time, and it really paid dividends for me for sure. So it was as far as the process of joining, that's how it went. A lot more conversation, a lot of different words were used in that conversation with my dad, but at the end of the day, he's the first person that'll tell you that it was the best thing that I ever did.
So you kind of said that you were in the Marines for 5 years. Were you stationed in one spot, or were you kind of moved around quite a bit throughout that?
For the most part, you get your duty station and you're basically based out of one spot. I was based out of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and it was my job. I was a tanker, which was basically you're either going to California in 29 Palms or you're going to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And I didn't want to do 29 Palms. It's kind of like the desert. So I wanted to do North Carolina. Did a ton of training events throughout the United States, and then obviously, continued doing that and deployed in 2014 as well. So really all over the place, but realistically, just based out of one spot throughout my entire contract.
What were kind of some of your day-to-day responsibilities? You said you're a tanker. That was your kind of role and title.
Yep, tanker was my role and title, and just like coaching or just like what you guys do, as far as scouting and recruiting and having conversations, right? As you get farther along in your job and your career in the Marines, your role changes, so your day to day changes, right? So like at first, you're the new guy, and in my first 2 years of being in the Marines, like it was tough. Like I had some pretty hard nosed, non-commissioned officers, NCOs, sergeants above me that were pretty hard nosed, and with that, came a ton of hard work and a ton of effort and energy, and making sure I was doing everything I can in order to be, liked by them, or in their good graces. So like that looked a little different. And then what I did at that time though too was I took all their leadership styles, right? So like I paid attention to who they were as a leader. And I knew that, I was kind of fastly moving up because, the attention to detail and wanting to be good. It allowed me to really focus on who they were as a leader and pick apart the things that I liked and also held on to things I didn't like. So then when I got promoted, very early, I was able to make adjustments right away.
Um, so when you were in the Marines, was there a point where you're like, man, I miss baseball. I think I can play collegiately. I want to get back into it.
There was a single point. So, off of that, like, our day to day, I know I didn't answer that question completely, but our day to day was typically like 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock, Monday through Friday, unless you're in the field, right? So you do all that training. Well, that's a lot of time. And I had a great group of friends when I was down there, and we played slow pitch softball every weekend for probably 3 years straight. And it was all the time. Where can we play? Where do we need to go? And that's kind of what we did it. But it wasn't until my last year, about 8 months left in the Marines, I had put up a reenlistment package to go to counterintelligence. That was going to be approved, and I was looking at possibly staying in, possibly getting out. Um, did an event at High Point University, and it was called Home Runs for Heroes. And I went twice because they kept sending me because I played softball and that's what we like to do. Um, Went twice, did home run batting practice with them or whatever, and hit probably 7 or 8 home runs during BP, just yanking them out from the left field pole to left center, just trying to hit home runs. Yeah, it was fine. Second time I came back through, I asked them to throw down the mound and see what my velocity was. And I did that, and I threw an 86-mile-an-hour fastball that I've never thrown in my life. Just didn't warm up, just played catch a little bit, and threw 86 down the mound. And at that time, I was like, I've never thrown 86 in my life. I barely warmed up, haven't even thrown a baseball in years. So, like, what does that look like? And at that point, I started reaching out, and I started looking around, and I started kind of paying attention and see what my options were, seeing if I had any options. And that's what really kind of did it for me. But I would say that mostly, though, like, the reason why I was at that point is because how seriously I took getting in the weight room, getting bigger, stronger in the Marines, and making sure that I took care of my body enough to play slow pitch softball every weekend.
Yeah, so my dad was in the Army out of high school. I got a couple friends that have gone into the military, and they always talk about how beneficial it has been on their life because the discipline that you learn and that they apply that every day to their jobs, their life, whatever. How has that been beneficial for your playing career and then now coaching career when you're trying to lead these young kids, in baseball and in life?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head on that one. It is about as impactful as you, right? For every really good Marine, there was also a pretty bad one. So you look at who you surround yourself with. That sounds very familiar in the clubhouse, right? Who you surround yourself with on your spare time, who you surround yourself with on your time off. It's very similar in the Marines where, it has played a bigger role than I could ever imagine, in a sense that, I had a goal when I was in the Marines. It was to get promoted to sergeant, get promoted fast and lead people. If you really want to do that, you have to do the things in order to get there. And it's the same thing as mindset. Between the mindset that makes a really good Marine is the same mindset that makes a really good captain on a baseball team or a teammate or a really good baseball player. It's the same mindset. It's not different. It's not any different. It's just doing what it takes in order to get the results that you want. And I think that is something that I learned in a sense. It's made me ultra driven in a sense that no matter what the task is, no matter where it is in my life, if I have to get to it, I'm going to find a way to get there. And it doesn't matter what it is or who's in the way or what's in the way. It does not matter to me. I'll figure it out. And that's kind of the mindset that it stuck with me in the Marines. And it's allowed me to really use that in playing career, whereas, you see a lot of guys that are really distraught when their playing career is over. I knew when my career was over that I did every single thing that I could possibly do to have the successful career that I wish I had, or I'd done everything that I believed in that was going to put me in the best position to be successful. So when I threw my last pitch, I knew I was going to get into coaching and I was okay with it. And it's because I knew I gave everything I had. Now, how can I get other people to do that as well? How can I instill the mindset of, there's a lot of people that talk about they compare baseball games to battle or war. It's not like that. It's not anything close to that. The mindset is what matters. The mindset of getting the job done, no matter what it is and however it is to get there. That's the mindset that you have to instill in these guys, and that's something I try to do on the coaching side, and that's something I did as a player, and now it's starting to get more and more involved with that because of the jobs that I've held. But man, like the military impacted me. It was night and day. Changed my life. Changed my life for the better. Met some of the best people in my life.
Moving on, like post-military, 2018, you end up at John Wood. How'd you get there? What was that process like getting back into playing?
So pretty wild process there. I was obviously still in the Marines at the time, and I started reaching out to schools. So I had about 6 months to figure out what I was going to do post Marines. So I reached out to a guy named Greg Wathen. He was one of probably 15 to 17 different schools that I reached out to. And he was the one that was like, hey, I'm all in. I'd love to have you. Pretty much the one person that really wanted me to play for him. And so I decided, okay, that's it. That's what I was going to do. Got out, and then was just enrolled into John Wood and just started playing there. Knew nothing about it. Knew anything crazy with that. Played summer ball. I got out in April, so I had summer to play. Watched them play a little bit. Then I played summer ball for a guy named Mike Waldo. He's an assistant basketball coach at SIUE, which is wild. One of the greatest pitching minds in probably Illinois State baseball history. Was the pitching coach at Edwardsville for about 30 years. Elite level human being and the biggest coach I've ever met. Did that and showed up to campus and played right field and pitched. So that was fun.
And then moving on to Parkland. So you didn't play a lot in your 2 years there, but then you end up at Louisville. How's that all happen? Obviously, in 2020 we had the COVID year. I was a part of that as well, playing JUCO ball out in Ohio. So I know all about that. I had 5 innings and then I had to move on. So what was that experience like? How did you find your way to Louisville?
Yeah, so with that, it all transpired from the year before. So into my first year at John Wood, I tore my UCL in the middle of the year. Finished out the year as a DH and got surgery, post season there. And what that allowed me to do was get to Parkland that first year and do a ton of rehab and allow me to get my body right in order to perform. From there, did that whole thing. My second year there, just obviously with COVID and everything happening, just had some good starts at the beginning and then, kept going throughout the entire time. And I would say probably, the background and then where I was at that time, it was probably lucrative for them. Started having some good conversations with Coach Snyder. Started having some conversations with some other schools. Was supposed to go out to California, but had some great issues with my time and everything for that. So was able to kind of readjust that whole plan. But really just started with good conversation. And at the time, it sounded like an absolute blast and really, really when someone talks about Louisville baseball, you feel like everybody should want to play there. And to me, it was an absolute blast to get into there and start playing for Coach McDonald and Coach Snyder. My career at Parkland was obviously really short as a player. Try to do my best as far as, became more vocal as a leader, as a player and whatnot, and leave a good path behind there and try to keep blazing a path for other people that are in the same shoes as me. But that's where that really started. Had a ton of good conversations there and it's the place where I wanted to be and finish up my career.
No, it's awesome. One last question just regarding your JUCO playing career. Me and Gavin both played JUCO ball coming out of high school, and you've obviously coached JUCO ball as well, and we'll touch on that a little later. But, because it's totally different. It's a totally different world, JUCO, especially probably once you got to Louisville. What are the benefits that you took from your JUCO playing days as you moved over to Louisville?
My biggest takeaway as a player was 99% of the times at junior college, you don't have all the tools and the gadgets that you need in order to maximize your ability. And we took pride in as a player was how can we do it using what we have instead of blaming reasons why we can't get better. And I think that mindset played a lot with my military mindset where it's like, okay, we don't have a slow motion camera, but we have an iPhone. Like, what can we do? How can we make sure it works? And how are we able to do those things? And I think it allowed me to continue that mindset of we're going to figure out how to get better. We're not going to let anybody else make excuses for us. So we're not going to make excuses either. And I had a really good coach, John Goble. He's with the Texas Rangers now. He's a really great pitching mind and allowed me to really focus in on that and really pick apart what that looked like and what development really looks like and how it's calculated with each pitcher. So be able to treat my playing career kind of like a coaching career was also fun for me, where it's like I was able to look at what made us better and also what maybe didn't and allow us to kind of protract that. But as far as going from JUCO playing to Louisville playing, it was definitely like maximizing what you have, being ready to play, understanding that you're going to be on the bus for a while and come ready to go every single day. And I think that mindset is what's so valuable going from JUCO to a place like Louisville, where you play JUCO, you play those 27 degree games in order to play at a place like Louisville. That's why you go through the gauntlet of the schedule, where they're playing double headers back-to-back days, and you're doing those things in order to play at a place like that.
Absolutely. And I mean, moving over to Louisville now, right? Like, so they're kind of known for the Omaha Challenge, which for those of you that are listening and don't know what that is, you should look it up. But it's basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's basically, this fall wrap-up challenge you guys do where, you guys are doing essentially like conditioning on steroids, essentially. Like it's massive tests that like push you mentally and physically. Were there any similarities with that in basic training? And I hope I'm not, underselling basic training by any mean, but
No, I'll tell you right now, the Omaha Challenge at age 27 was worse than it would have been if I was age 19. I can tell you that right now. So it was much different in a sense of that. But like, yeah, it's supposed to be. And you look at it and you talk about the coaches that are like, oh, that's so dumb or that's this. But everything works, as long as it's explained and people are believing in it. And I think the belief in that whole thing was like, hey, your fall is done. Your hardest stuff in the fall, it should have been, getting better and going through adversity. This is the last thing that you have to do in order to play baseball here at Louisville. That's kind of how I took it. And I think if you take it like that, I think it allows you to really grow from it. It definitely had its similarities as far as like the strenuous and the physicality of it. Coach Farrell, he was a strength coach at the time. He put it together. He does a great job with that. Guys have fun with it. It's a blast. You just learn to embrace it. Like, it's not going to be fun. Like, nobody liked to do the medley. Nobody liked to do, the 2 mile run around when you got to practice. Like, nobody likes to do that. But if you're going to do what it takes and you're going to close the gap, you're going to figure it out and you're going to do those things in order to get there. And I think that's a really big piece in college baseball. It's all about what can you do to get the results that you want. Very similar to the military, once again.
No, that's good stuff. And so that year you were at Louisville, just to rattle off some names you played with, friend of the show, Jack Payton, who's been on here,
Yeah.
Luke Smith, who was viral for probably guys me and Gavin's age, also Henry Davis, just to name a few. But again, just to add on to your unique story, you didn't play a lot at Louisville. So how did you approach each day, just doing whatever it took to help your team, showing up to the field?
Yeah, no, and like it's a whole different scenario. You look at that 2021 team, and I don't think I don't think there's a more talented team out there. And we weren't on paper, we weren't very successful. We had 8 drafts that year, 9 including the signee. But of that whole roster, like 16 guys are already in the league. They're already playing minor league baseball or in the league. We have the 1 overall draft pick on our team, and we just didn't perform the way we needed to go. But for me specifically, it was just making sure I did everything I could do. Always be ready to go. My body started to fall apart there too, and a lot of that was with me and just making sure I was good to go and trying to maximize something that had been just deteriorating over the course of my time, from the military and stuff like that, and trying to keep up with the throwing loads and whatnot. So a lot of that, was self-imposed. But honestly, like, there's a lot of really good players that threw 3 innings more than me that went in the 5th round the next year. So like you look at that and you're looking to understand like how tough it really is, how tough it is to play at that level. It's extremely tough to play at that level. And that's why I think I'm so appreciative of Coach McDonald and Coach Snyder and, Coach Raj and giving the opportunity to do those things, is because it showed me something, a part of college baseball that I've never seen. And I may never see it again unless I coach at that level, is how hard it really is, like what it looks like, how fine, how good, and how adaptable those pitchers are and having success. So, for me, it was always going to be the same thing. Like, I'm going to be ready to go no matter what. It doesn't matter to me. I just knew my opportunity was going to happen, and I wanted to make sure I maximized it. I think, I talk our pitchers here a little bit, and this is off topic somewhat, but, I looked at my outings, they were 2 months apart, and I gave up 0 runs in my first outing. And when you look at that and you understand what that looks like, you give up 0 runs, you don't pitch for 2 months. Like, that tells you everything you need to know on how cutthroat and how hard it really is. And I like I said, I can't be more thankful of it. For those 2 appearances that I made, I learned so much about everything, and it allows me to keep doing that. But as far as every single day, talking to certain guys, I talked to Jack Payton a lot. He was a freshman that year, and just communicating with him and just making sure that they know that they're doing a good job and whatnot, and try to stay in my lane a little bit. It's very different when you have that much talent on a team.
Yeah, speaking of Jack, Tyler kind of mentioned it. He was on the podcast, I don't know, probably a couple months ago, but he's one of those kids. You guys have similar mindsets from the sounds of it. He's just super driven and, on top of his stuff, and he's a good dude. But speaking of Luke Smith too, quick, it's funny enough, I saw that video on John Boy reposted his video from the World Series in 2019 this morning. I just thought that was funny. But yeah, so moving on to Parkland College. You coached at Parkland. Spring of 2022 was your first year. You just had a pretty good year, 31 wins. A lot of guys moving on to play at 4-year schools. So what was that first year coaching for you kind of like? Was it, good experience? Were you nerves coming into it, coaching for the first time, or what was that like?
No, not at all. And post that playing career, I was the pitching coach at UIS, which is, just south of Champaign. Prior to that, I didn't even catch that. But yeah, I was there for 6 months, got to work with a guy, Ryan Copeland, awesome dude, who's the head coach at NIU now. So I did that real quick, and then I jumped into the driver's seat, I think it was like 20 days before the first game or something along those lines. That first year was a struggle. First year was a struggle in a sense, you're jumping in a situation that you don't know anything about. You don't know the players. You don't know what's going on. You don't know the coaches. You don't know really anything, besides what you have with your eyes right away. And that year was a really big, learning year to figure out what we needed to do and how we needed to get there. And the 31 wins, it felt like we won 2 games. And that tells you anything about how competitive I can be and how competitive, I expect us to be. It felt like we just underperformed and just did not get, win enough games that I felt like we should have. And with that, you're able to learn a lot. Had some talented players. It's fun watching these guys now. And I see them, we coach against, this year I coached against Jack Young, who's pitching for Iowa. And, I just think about it. Man, I wish I had you another year. I wish I got to coach you another year. And watching guys like him and Cole Evans at Nebraska and, Nick Gregory at Ball State and those guys, they're doing awesome. And it's fun for me to do that and watch. And you just wish you do more your first year, right when you jump in there. And that year was interesting, just trying to figure out what we got, figure out what direction we need to go in and how we need to get there.
Yeah. You talked a lot about the military background, but I imagine that with that experience, you probably kind of implement that into your coaching. So did you utilize that, kind of the things you learned to, your first year coaching, try and develop that and kind of give those guys that mentality to, especially at the JUCO level, it's a grind, and in the military, it's tough, it's hard. So did you kind of try and implement that with those guys?
Occasionally at times, at the same time, when you think about a mindset like that, it's very selective and you gotta be careful, it's not for everyone. So that's why recruiting is so important and why that connection during the recruiting process and that honesty goes there. I knew I didn't recruit any of those guys. So I was very careful with that, what that looked like. Obviously we have non-negotiables and expectations and stuff like that. I did communicate that with those guys and try to really get the most out of that group that we had. And then what it did, it really set up for for the next year. We wanted to win. We wanted to win bad. Just were we doing the things? Were we doing the things to win enough? And the answer is no. 31 wins at Parkland's it's not good enough. And that's something I looked at. Something I really wore on my shoulders a little bit was like 31 here. It's not good enough for me. And what do we need to get? What do we need to do to get there? And like I said, that military mindset's the same thing, man. Like, it allows me to connect with players at a different level. I feel like, in a sense, that like my leadership style in the Marines was like, hey, we're going to take care of you, but you're going to work hard. You're going to do these things. I'll say it every year from my rest of my coaching career. The only people that aren't going to like me are lazy people. And that's it. And I don't want them to like me, because if lazy people like me, I'm not doing my job. I'm not holding people accountable. I'm not doing the things that I need to do as a coach in order to have success. So there's a standard with that. There's a standard with everything. But as far as, talking with them and trying to get them to understand that and going through with that, I think that was a huge thing. For that, the end of that year and then moving on to that second year too, I think that was a huge part of it.
Yeah, just touching on another aspect of your job as a JUCO head coach. So obviously your goal is to help your players get to that next school, right? You don't want, you can't stay at JUCO forever, obviously. So what was the process like in getting those guys to 4-year schools? Were you heavily involved in those recruitments? If so, like, what were some of the biggest things you looked for in those next schools for your guys?
I gotcha. When you look at placing players, the first thing you look at is the player, and then you figure out what the team is that they're looking at or what they're going to, and you reach out to people. You start talking to people, and you allow them to do things differently. Cole Evans, for instance, is a starting outfielder for Nebraska, and Cole Evans, we had a date to be back for spring practice. I just got the job, I just took over, and I get a call from my best player that he's going to be 4 days late getting back because he wants to do a workout with Nebraska. And it's like, I was immediately, yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people would be hesitant to do that because they're worried about right now. Whereas, in junior college, you have to worry about right now and developing habits to make them successful. But at the end of the day, it's our job to make sure that they go on to the next level and able to perform there as well. And I think that's a really big piece that I took away. And I think that's a really big piece where, kids more than ever want to be surrounded by people who care about their investment and who cares about what they care about. Because if you do that and everybody cares about each other's goals, you're going to be pretty successful. I think that's such a good example of understanding like what your job is at a junior college and making sure you get people to go into where they need to go.
Yeah, and you found, your second year, you guys had a really successful year, 46 wins, only 14 losses. And again, you had guys move on to the next level. So, did you feel like anything changed between year one and year two for you? Or was it just, another year with the guys and developing them to kind of how you coached them?
Yeah, I think the guys we brought in, you talk about, winning that many games in 2 years was an absolute blast, right? So you look at that and you start looking at the career as far as that goes. It's on paper, it's like, man, that was awesome. Well, only 7 people were allowed back. Only 7 players were brought back the next year for my year 2. And a strong conversation was had with those guys, like, hey, these are the standards. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to get there. And we stayed true to that from that July time frame all the way until that last game we played. We stayed true to who we were. We had the mindset of we're going to do what it takes to get there, and nobody's going to stand in our way, and nothing's going to stand in our way from getting there. And I think with that was a huge part of it. And then honestly, in recruiting, we were getting players we shouldn't have gotten, without a doubt, getting players that moved on and guys that are still there, moving on after their year this year as well. But getting good players in the sense that players that were able to get better, and then players that were able to maximize their abilities and make sure we're giving everything they can as well. So I think it had a lot to do with it. I think the investment in the players was very evident. I know my exit meetings was the hardest thing I ever had to do because nobody wanted to leave. And there's no better compliment in the coach's mind, in my opinion, than having an entire team that nobody wants to not play for. They all wanted to play for another year together. They all wanted to play together. They all wanted to play for us coaches every single time. And for me, having that, it wasn't the success that created that. That was a result, right? So the result was the success we had on the field where we won 46 games. That was the result. But the process getting there was where they became really close friends. That's where they became, closer, off the field. That's where they became, more understanding of why Silk is being hard on me today, because it matters. Like, why is Silk yelling at me to run a 5-0 to first base every single time? Like, why does that matter? And I feel like that's what really set us off and allowed us to get there. And that to me was the big staple of that year, was the consistency that we brought on a daily basis. And I think that matters more than ever. You talk about, getting players and recruiting, that's awesome, right? But they want to get coached. Players now more than ever want that investment back. And I made it very clear every single day that we were going to invest in them, whether they liked it or not. So that was a huge thing for us. But I think that was the biggest thing, was really just pouring in our players.
Yeah, that's awesome. So kind of transitioning here to where you're at now at Jacksonville State. You're the coordinator of baseball operations and the director of player development. So what kind of is your, day-to-day role now? You're not maybe a head coach. Obviously, you're probably doing more development type stuff, but kind of at practice, games, what's kind of your day-to-day?
Yeah, very unique role. Get to do it with a really awesome head coach, Coach Steve Beazer, was at Mizzou. Did an awesome job there. Had an awesome job at SEMO prior to that. Just a really great baseball mind, and that was really lucrative for me. But as far as my baseball day to day, it's very different. It's transitioned a ton into the the operation side of things for the most part, but it's allowed me to do multiple different things, as far as, running our social media, making sure that's up to par, making sure all of our accounts are good, and making sure everybody's getting the love that they need, and setting all that stuff up, travel, games, meals, hotels, all that good stuff that, everybody loves doing so much. And it allows me to do multiple different things as far as running a budget. So realistically, I ran a program at a junior college, but this is allowing me to learn what it's like to run a Division I program. And it's allowing me to really dive into that and what that looks like. How does the budgets work? What are we doing in order to get there? Where can we close some gaps on some money stuff? Where can we save? Where can we spend a little more? Figuring out what that looks like. And I think that's going to be a really big tool for me, down the road whenever, a Division I comes calling, or if they do, I'll have that experience as far as that goes. As far as, development stuff, I help out where needed. Lately I've been hitting a ton of fly balls or outfielders to help out with them. I love hitting fly balls with outfielders, so that's awesome anyways. Work out with pitchers when I'm, when I can and available to do that, and when they want me to do that. And other than that, it's really allowed me to kind of bloom into a different role for the first time in my entire life. My first year as a official season, I was head coach, and you learn very quickly that a great head coach wants awesome assistants. And I think that's really important, looking forward, where, if you've ever been a head coach at a junior college, you're going to make a hell of an assistant one day because of all the things you have to do in order to get the job done. So that's allowed me to do that. And then my last thing I really try to do is I've always had a niche of connecting with people. Like, I'm a people person. That's what I love to do. So connecting with players and understand that, what can I do to help you? Tell me what I can do to help you be a better baseball player, or what do you need? Making sure you're there for those guys and making sure you're there to communicate with them. And I would say I'm probably the one that's probably going to be on them a little bit, which is good. I like that. I like the standard, and you're going to keep it. But also, I'm the same person that's going to dab them up. Like, it doesn't matter to me. I have a great time with them. They do a great job. But just communicate with them, understanding what that looks like, and trying to lead and making sure that they have someone they can follow as far as that goes, and try to be an outlet for them as well. So very different, very broad, a ton of different things I get my hand in. Weight training stuff I got my hand in, the practice stuff I got my hand in, recruiting I very little in, but all that kind of stuff, I'm able to kind of really input and really try to help out as much as I can.
Yeah, no, that's all awesome stuff. So one thing that I really wanted to talk about and was excited to kind of hear from your perspective on was just talking about Blake Wolters. we interviewed Blake, what was that, July or June? And I mean, the thing I took away from him is just, he's just an awesome kid at the end of the day. Like, he's just a really good dude for someone being as talented as he is. He's just so humble and down to earth. But as, the person that kind of developed him and helped coach him along the way throughout high school, um, what was kind of your process, I guess, with the development of Blake? When did you first kind of start helping him, and how did you kind of move him along?
Yeah, absolutely. And Blake is one of my favorite people. His family is one of my favorite people in my life. They're incredible, and watching him succeed has been an absolute blast. I'm really glad Shooter Hunt brought him to the Super 60 because some tough conversations were coming for sure there, and I'm really glad that he was able to do that, and Drew Locasio as well, with Diego obviously. But really that sophomore year, right? That sophomore summer, he was playing for a team called the Yard Goats, and if you do the math right, you'll understand that I was still playing when I started coaching him. And for him, he was a talented guy, right? He was very talented in a sense that he threw 81 to 82, 83, and just had no mechanics. But man, did he throw strikes! Like, he was running down the mound, he was doing all kinds of things wrong, but he threw strikes. Bigger kid, like 6'2", just skinny and just this your average super athletic kid, but he did nothing right on the mound, and he still was successful. The only thing he did right was have good results. And I looked at that, and really that winter, started talking with him and his parents. Now I'm at the University of Illinois Springfield, and we're talking a little bit, and we start getting him in some fall games, and we start working on his lower half. That was my mind. That was the biggest thing for him. I've talked to a couple of scouts, recently about, that as that it started having some stuff come up with the Royals and posting them and stuff like that, asking kind of what I've done with it. And looking at him, understand that he has arm speed, he has hand speed. Working on a pitch arsenal at 81, 83 is no good. How can we get him faster? How can we make his velo go up? How can we get his stuff up? And it was immediately diving into the lower half. With him, he's a standard ground up athlete, right? Where he was inefficient at the bottom. So before we do anything up top, like, we got to attack that first. And we talked about that strength training. Mapped out all of his strength training, mapped out all of his throwing. Me and Mom talked a ton about the food, and she made every meal, I think, and she makes some good meals. Like, I'm talking, like, we got appetizer, we got salad, we got meal. Like, I'm talking like every meal. And like, when she'd invite me over, I'm like, hey, I gotta watch what I eat. I'm not trying to, and like every meal for 3 years that she was doing, and like, with all that paired up and him training with us and him doing velocity based stuff, that was, I think, is what allowed him to really kind of kickstart this whole training a little bit. But it all started with his strength training, lower half, correcting that, starting to use the body a little better. I mean, that fall after he was seen by Drew, he was up to 88, 89 at times, maybe scraped the 90 that first fall, but I don't remember that off the top of my head. But that winter, we absolutely got after it. So now we're going into his junior year, and he's playing basketball. And him playing basketball was something that we talked about, where, he was still doing things baseball-wise during basketball season, and I made sure that we were able to communicate that. Him and I talked all the time about, what can you do? Here's bands this day. We're going to throw this day, this day, this day. Make sure you take care of your basketball. Make sure you're still competitive there, because I'm a firm believer of the multiple sports, because him being a competitor in basketball is going to help him be a competitor in baseball more than anything, and allowed him to really do that. And we built up, had a good build-up program based around basketball. And next thing you know, he's throwing 92, 93, starting off the season. And when he started doing that his junior year, started to turn some heads. Committed to school, I believe, around that time frame. It was Purdue at the time, and then he took some tests and tested out of it, and had all kinds of issues that summer with that, and figured out where he wanted to go. Wasn't there because of the money. Ended up going to Arizona, and from there, his development started to progress. Right, so we talked about the lower half, we talked about the weight training. The spring after that time, 6 months or 5 months or whatever it was later, he's 15, 20 pounds heavier. He's throwing harder. His lower half's in sync. Everything looks great. all without doing a single velocity throwing program. Like this was all just standard buildup and just standard on ramp. Like he did no throwing program that allowed him to gain velocity from the fall to the spring of his junior year. And to me, that just showed me everything I needed to know. Like we cleaned up some mechanics, and he's throwing 92 now. What's it going to look like when he gets into an actual throwing program? And that's where we kind of took off with that and played that summer. Going into his senior year, played down there. He was throwing some pretty good pitches. For me, early on in the summer when I was coaching his travel ball team, and then eventually I was just like, hey, like you're too good to pitch in this right now, and that's about when he decommitted. Called up Seth Von Buren with the old Gators and sent them down to Georgia to pitch against Kane's national team. And that was fun to see. It was fun to see that. And it all goes back to like kind of what Tyler asked me earlier, like, how is that mindset when it comes to placing players? It's always been my mindset in a sense, because, what travel ball coach would take their best pitcher to ever play in the travel ball organization and say, hey, you're too good to pitch for us right now. You're going to go pitch for this other team that's a travel ball organization because it's what's best for you. And I think that's something that, us travel ball coaches at that time looked at was like, is it for the kid or is it for us? And for me, it's always been for the players. Like he was ready to showcase his talent. He went and showcased his talent, and it helped projectile him to something really awesome. Pitched in that perfect game thing down in Florida. But, the PBR exposure that he got, the everything he did for that and allowed him to catapult, through the rankings with that, and then allowed him to go to the Super 60. That's when we get to that point. But after that summer, we dove right into his strong program, like attacking the volume and intensity and shuffling that around on top of his continuous strength training, but not forgetting the mobility. Like we stayed very mobile. We stayed very active. His hips work great. His body moves extremely well. Doesn't have a ton of layback like normal people would already attack. But for me, it was never attacking that. We didn't need to create any more arm speed. He had it. So we naturally built it back up. And really dove into that. And then you may just continue into the Super 60 breakdown because I can.
Yeah, go for it. Absolutely. Yeah.
No, I mean, and then, after that, they got that fall, right? That fall starts to happen, and we start doing some velocity-based training, before winter break, before we did a deload program. And he came out to Parkland and after coaching, practice, and we come out there about 6 guys, and we put a little L screen out in front of the mound because we had no catcher. And I wanted him to throw the baseball as hard as he can. And the goal that day was 95 miles an hour. And he hit 95 multiple times that day. And from there, that was his last high intent day of throwing before we kind of got into winter break. And that did so many different things for him, I think, because it made him hungrier. He made it a task to hit 95. He did it. And now he made other goals. And I kind of made the goals for him a little bit. And I would tell him and his family and everything like that. As we keep going through all this and talking about it, he started his deload, decided not to play basketball, which was awesome at that time. At that time, he made a decision like, okay, we're gonna dive into this. Yeah, he wanted to play professionally. Like that was the goal. And that's why he did that, I believe. And we worked tirelessly. You talk about a kid that did everything he was supposed to do and then some. He did it at 100% every single day. Dove into the strength training, went way more into it than I thought he was going to. Became a huge aspect of him. Medicine ball training, doing all of that stuff that he was supposed to do on each day. Gets into the on ramp, for that winter, and like that first catch play, I was like, this is gonna be like this is real. Like he's moved real weight. Like this comes out easy. I'm talking with him. Hey, like why are you throwing it like that? Like what's your effort here? Not even telling him how hard it was, and like. You're talking about a ball that just comes out of your hand at 92 off the bat. It's just like, okay, like we got to make sure we go nice and slow and build him up for that on ramp there. And, he was pitching at 95, 96. And then the Super 60 thing was kind of coming around, hadn't got the invite yet. Started pushing those buttons a little bit to make that happen. And that is when, I knew he was going to do it was when he got selected to go to the Super 60. I remember him telling me a story about he was telling a player that he was there that he was going to throw 96 miles an hour, and the dude like gaffed at him. And like he was texting me, he's like, "Hey, I told this guy I was going to throw 96," and like they laughed. And in my mind, I'm like, I wish I was there because like it's going to happen. I saw it last week when he did it. And his whole on-ramp was based around being successful for that day, and then continuing on. So, like, when guys were like, oh, the slider wasn't that good that day, I'm like, we had been talking about it for 6 weeks that, hey, your slider's not going to be great that day because we're only going to have been throwing it for 2 weeks because nobody cares about your slider in January. Nobody cares. They care about what your arm speed looks like, how you look, are you in the zone, out of the zone, and how do you carry yourself. That's all they cared about. Nobody cared. Nobody talked about him throwing the best slider in PBR history, but they talked about him throwing the hardest ever. And when you target things like that, and you target development, it all matters. And when we targeted that, it allowed that to take off. And you guys know the story from that. It blew up, changed his life, what you guys did. And it all goes back to that first time that Drew Lucasio saw him at 81, 84, just constant communication with him and you guys and watching what PBR did for him and how it can be such a great tool for everybody. He timed out his events, went into that and the rest is history. He was 96 plus every start, had the best stuff I've ever seen in college or high school. Best human being. Just an absolute blast to watch now. Still not done coaching him, so you get to still help out a ton. Get to still help out a ton on his winter stuff and whatnot. And he shows up to spring training throwing 90. He doesn't even send me the 9 anymore before. It's just, hey, I was 6-1. It was 96 to 100. Like, it's just like, yeah, I'm just whatever, man.
Yeah, so I remember telling Blake, so I'm from like a really small town near Peoria, and it just absolutely fires me up seeing kids like Blake from small town, central Illinois, doing stuff on the big stage like that. Because, a lot of times they're the type of kids that maybe get under-recruited, underlooked at. People don't know who they are, and then they just pop up like that, and it's so cool to see. And I mean, Luke Teschke, he's kind of another kid like that from, small town, Monticello, Illinois. Like, I love seeing kids like that pop up, and it's cool, especially how good of a kid Blake is, having the success that he's had. I mean, he deserves it. So, but the last thing I kind of want to touch on too. Oh, go ahead.
No, 100%. Like, it's insane, and they all play with their friends. Like, they're not going other places to play summer ball. They can develop and play with their friends.
Yep. The last thing I want to touch on too is I know it's really important to you, and I think it's something that probably doesn't get talked about enough, but it's kind of becoming probably more important in not only sports, but just life in general, to talk about it and be vulnerable about it, but just mental health. And as I know someone that places a high importance on it, how do you kind of maybe talk about that with your guys that you coach, or, a guy like Blake, someone that you're developing and, just helping out? Like, how do you kind of place the importance and kind of explain to them to talk more about mental health, be a little more open about it, and if they need help, to share it with you or whoever they feel comfortable with?
Yeah, 100%. It's extremely important to me, and that stemmed from the Marines. I had some very close calls with some people, and that was one of the things that became glued to me. It changed my life, and I really, really dove into that. I stopped the Marine from killing himself when I was in the service, and that at that point it was like I took it differently. Like, I learned differently, and I learned to picture how things are supposed to work and whatnot. And I sought help myself. It's one of those things, like, it's one of the hardest things to do, but it's just one of those things that you change. It changes you as a person. Nobody would ever guess that I was in the military for 5 years when I started talking to them. And it's just like, because like me seeing that help and me communicating with the people, in order to do that, it's allowed me to really, have a different identity. Yeah, it's big. It's a huge part of me, but it's not who I am. And I think that's a huge thing when you start talking about these college players, where they think they're baseball players. They think that's who they are. It's just what they do. And understanding and communicating with them, understanding like, hey, what makes you a successful baseball player, or what process it takes in order to make you a better player or a better teammate is the same process you'll take into being a better employee, a better boss, or better whatever it is that they do. And I think talking about the mental health thing, in a sense that it's not always about mental health. It's about the communication that happens before that. When you start talking about mental health, it's typically after the fact, after something's happened, or after, an event or something. Well, what are we doing to be proactive about it? Are we having the conversations daily with these kids, or are they being unsuccessful and we just ignore them? Or are they having success and then you just stop talking to them because they had a bad day? or what does that look like? And I think for me, I think the relationships matter. Like when it comes to the mental health side of things, I think the relationships matter more than ever, because they need to know you care. These kids get one college career and they want to know where they're at, that they're being invested in and that they're being cared for, but also held accountable. A lot of growth is made being held accountable. And I think that stems a huge importance in mental health and having that conversation with people, because it's hard to have a conversation with a 19-year-old kid about mental problems, mentally health problems and whatnot. And it's tough. That was tough for me, being a 23-year-old. And when you look at that and you understand what that looks like, there's roundabout ways of addressing it before and being proactive. And I think being proactive with it is an absolute great thing to do. Understanding that, hey, like these are going to be your awesome days. Like you're going to have bad days. You're going to have days where, you're going to struggle. It's when you start putting everything together. Girlfriend breaks up with me. School is going terrible. Parents are divorcing. Baseball is not working. Typically baseball was an escape, but now we're struggling. Those conversations, they come and go for sure, just based on who you have. But for me, I'm very cognizant of it. And I think it's very important for everybody to be cognizant of it, just because of the times we're in right now. And I really take pride in that. I love talking to people, man. Like if there's ever someone having a bad day or they're ever going through something, like I love to be the guy that they want to talk to. And more and more, I've kind of become that. Junior college, I was at a lot. Some of the toughest conversations you have are in the office and with people having bad days. But as long as you understand that you're not remembered for your bad days. All these teammates, you guys probably talk about it too. You guys remember your best teammate. You guys remember who the best guys you wanted to be around. Those are the things you're going to remember. Nobody's going to remember the day that you had a, breakdown, or the day that you got upset, or all those days. You'll never talk about that with your family, your kids. They'll talk about the time that you guys played MOF for 3 hours on the bus to Mobile, Alabama, or whatever it is. So it's extremely important to me. I hope it's extremely important to everybody else across the College Board, which I think it's getting there. But it's a huge piece for me. What are you guys? What's your take on it?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's something that I feel like in these college kids and high school kids, almost they put too much weight on I'm a baseball player, kind of like you said, or whatever sport they're in, and they think that's their only thing that makes them valued. And then they forget sometimes that, hey, I'm a person too. I need to, at the end of the day, realize that baseball, my sport, it's going to be over. So placing less value maybe on being that athlete and placing it more on who you are, I think is super important. And I mean, it's something that, going through college and being a guy that was not very good, to be honest, I always was super hard on myself. And then you're done with JUCO, and I just went to ISU for school, and I'm like, man, who am I? I played baseball my entire life. I always focused on that. Like my identity was in baseball, and just learning how to kind of shift that mindset and figuring out truly who you are I think is super important. So it's something that in the past probably 3-4 years has become really important for me. So
Yeah, and I mean, I don't have anything to add there, Gavin. I mean, I think you hit it on the head, and I think the biggest thing that we probably see is just all the pressure like these high school kids put on themselves, whether it be at a showcase or out at a summer ball tournament, right? Like summer ball was supposed to be the most fun you had. And I just think I agree with you guys. It's just become more and more important, and to have those difficult conversations as well. It's not easy, but they need to be had. And I I can't add any more than what Gavin and you said. So
Yeah, no, I mean the pressure. You talk about the pressure and understanding that, man. Like I wish kids can hear and like understand that there's a place where they can play college baseball at any level if they really want to play. There's college baseball at every level if they ever want to play it. You just got to find it. And it's just understanding that, just because of someone that says someone doesn't want you doesn't mean you're not good enough and you should just shut down. Like the New York Yankees build their outfield different than the St. Louis Cardinals. Right. So understanding what that looks like, understanding, going where you're wanted, that's a huge part of it too. But there's a lot of pressure, man. And like, when you guys probably deal with rankings and whatnot, I'm sure they probably do look too much into that. They probably do get stressed out about that. But it's like the only pressure you have in college or high school is the pressure you put on yourself. Like, there's no coach standing in the batter's box with you telling you better get a hit, you better get a hit, you better get a hit. Like, it's not happening. So hopefully that starts getting worked out. Hopefully that starts getting a little bit, addressed, throughout that. But 100%, man.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing. And
I think when we interviewed Jack Payton, he kind of actually mentioned that, because we talked about rankings, and I mean, Drew says it all the time. Rankings isn't everything. We do it because it's important, but it doesn't. If I'm the kid, who cares if I'm ranked number 1 or 50? I should just figure out who you are, find a place that fits you. Don't worry if you're number 1 or number 10. So that's the most important thing when it comes to that kind of stuff. All right, so Silkwood, thanks for coming on today. Really appreciate you being here. You gave a ton of great advice for these guys to take away and kind of learn from and go forward, and hopefully develop into a better baseball player, and more importantly, a better person. So really appreciate you being here and doing this for us.
Nope, absolutely. It's a blast. I love what you guys do, man. You guys change more lives than what you think. That's for sure.